Okay, my latest video is on another one of my dream cars. This happens to be a 1988 turbo Lotus Esprit. There are a bunch of mid-engine cars that first started coming out around 1966. The Lamborghini Miura was the first one, and as far as I can tell, the second one was the Lotus Europa. Both of those came out in '66. 69, the Porsche 914 came out. In 1972, the X19 from Fiat came out. But around 1971 or so, Colin Chapman was thinking they needed to replace the Europa with something a little more sophisticated. And apparently he ran into Giorgetto Giugiaro, the famous designer who had started his own firm at that time called Ital Design. And they discussed making a new mid-engine Lotus. So he used a lengthened Europa chassis and came out with his show car for the 1972 show car circuit. So this is what Giugiaro came up with. It was known as the silver car. And this is just a shot from the back. So this is a picture of the Series 1, which follows the Giugiaro concept car pretty closely. Of course, the white Series 1 brings back memories of the famous James Bond car. So when you say Lotus Esprit, this is immediately what everybody thinks of. Of course, if you drive like this, your insurance rates go up. So the submarine was in Spy Who Loved Me, and then for Your Eyes Only, they briefly had this Esprit, which was a turbo version. This car corners very flat. Is very confidence-inspiring in its grip levels. On the other hand, I read somewhere that they say the engine sounds like a sewing machine, and it pretty much does. Definitely does not have the exotic wail of a Ferrari. But when you spool up the turbo, it actually goes pretty well. And the rest is history. The production began in 1976 from the Lotus factory with what they call the Series 1, which is slightly different looking from this. It has a steel backbone chassis and the rest of the body is fiberglass. On the original Series 1, it was a 2-liter 4-cylinder engine with 160 horsepower in European form and 140 horsepower in the US form, and that was with carburetors. Had a Citroën gearbox and it weighed 2,200 pounds. Also had X19 taillights, interestingly enough, and is most famous for being in the movie Spy Who Loved Me with James Bond and Barbara Bach. In 1978 they came out with the Series 2, where they started putting the cooling ducts behind the rear quarter windows. They changed to rover tail lights, they changed the front spoiler some, and also in 1978 they won the World Formula One Constructors Championship, so they made a special series of black and gold John Player special cars that were called the JPS Specials. I think they only made like 149 of those. In 1980 they upped the engine to 2.2 liters. So it's called the Series 2.2 or S2.2. Same power as the previous engine but more torque, and now they galvanized the chassis. Also there was another special edition from their newest F1 sponsor, which was Essex Petroleum, and the Essex Special was the first Esprit to have a turbocharged engine. Also had a dry sump engine. And they made some suspension changes. So in 1981 there were two models. There was the S3 or Series 3 with the 2.2 liter engine, and then there was the Turbo Esprit with the wet sump setup. In 1986 they added a higher compression car called the HC series, which was the first car that had fuel injection. 1987 was the first big change. That was the body redesigned by Peter Stevens with more rounded edges, which this is a Stevens body. They also improved their manufacturing process of the fiberglass body because they used a vacuum resin infusion process. They also changed to a Renault transaxle, and the previous inboard disc brakes became outboard disc brakes. And again, it came as a 2.2 liter or the 2.2 liter turbo. In 1993 there was another redesign by Julian Thompson, and that was called the Series 4 or S4, most notable for the spoiler midway up the rear deck lid. And at that point they added power steering. In 94 they had the S4S for the S4 Sport, where they increased the horsepower to 300 and put a bigger rear wing on it. In 1996 they had a V8 engine that they had developed for another car that never came to pass, so they were trying to figure out what to do with their V8 engine, so they put it in the Esprit. It was all aluminum engine, twin turbo, and 350 horsepower, so it could do 0 to 60 in 4.4 seconds. And in 1999 they did something called the Sport 350, where they bumped up the horsepower a little bit more, and then production finally ended in 2004. So here's your basic Esprit interior. It's got a pretty wide central tunnel to go around the backbone chassis. Lots of leather everywhere, and kind of modernistic looking. It also has a removable roof panel. You can either pop it up in the back or take the whole panel off and stick it in the rear trunk area, which is kind of nice. So it's not quite a convertible, but almost there. The gearbox is direct linkage with some bell cranks and stuff. It's not cable or anything like that. It's not as light and flickable as a Mazda Miata gearbox, but it's still very precise, and the instruments are all in a big pod that sits on top of the dashboard, and they give you quite a comprehensive set. You have an ammeter, and oil pressure, tachometer, boost gauge in the center, speedometer, engine temperature, and fuel gauge over there. I gotta say, the speedometer is almost useless. It's tiny little numbers pretty far away from you, so you have to kind of memorize where the speeds are and just go by the needle. Then you have the radio and the climate control system, and the stick shift. The pedals are pretty darn close together. You can't drive this wearing really wide shoes, or you'll be hitting your brake and your accelerator at the same time. The handbrake is between the driver and the outside world, so when you put the handbrake on, to make it easier to get out of the car, you click the handbrake on and then you just shove the lever forward. You can get out, and then to release the handbrake you pull it back up, push the button and put it down. So that's how that works. And under the dash there is a wire handle that you reach up and flip forward, and then you can open the front cover. So up front there is a real spare tire, unusual, and a little bit of space for some odds and ends, but not a whole lot. You have your tool kit there, spare there, obviously the brake booster and reservoir. Have a very unusual fuse layout. They have the fuses here and the relays and a couple of fuses on this bar that runs across the trunk, and then you have the windshield washer And that's pretty much it for the front. So normally when you look through the back window, all you see is the grill work across the engine there, and then when you pop the lid, the engine is still undercover, as it were, and then you have to open the lid to actually get to the engine there. So normally the engine's covered, and you have actually quite a big trunk or boot in the back. The battery's over in the corner in the dark there. But it's pretty decent size, and supposedly you can get that front or the roof panel stuffed back in here. Things to look out for is they need a new timing belt every 5 years or 25,000 miles. The Renault gearbox is supposed to be fairly weak and fragile. Apparently the Citroën box is better. Supposedly you should never jump start an Esprit. Apparently it usually will ruin the alternator. Because it's a fiberglass body, it does tend to have stress cracks, and this one had quite a few that I had to fix. The engine mounts can go bad, known for their electrical problems, as a British car should be, and they have the famous British car reliability. One of the other things about them that can be a problem is it actually has 2 fuel tanks with a fuel filler on each side in the buttress here, and apparently you can occasionally get leaking around the quarter windows that goes down and gets onto the padding around the gas tanks. They put a foam padding that holds water, and the gas tanks are steel, so then you can get rusty tanks and they can start leaking fuel. So apparently that's another Lotus Esprit classic problem. And in the back is the 2.2 liter 4-cylinder turbo engine. As you can probably tell, it's tilted at quite an angle to the left, so the valve covers are way over there, even though it's a straight 4-cylinder. And the air cleaner is over on the right. And down in the back is the turbocharger. Steering feel is excellent. I don't know why they brought out power steering later in the series, because it's not very heavy at all in your hands.